Hey, folks. Welcome to another command briefing. It's your host, Jared A. Chambers. Man, I thought I had a bunch to talk about last night. Wait till you hear what we have today. I mean, at some point, it just really starts to get unreal. Wow. So it is Tuesday, August the 1st, and this is episode 2 of the new command briefing. We are back. If you're listening live, thank you. We're doing it live here again.
We'll do it live. Okay. No. We'll do it live. Fuck it. Do it live. I'll write it and we'll do it live.
And we will pause intermittently tonight. We're going to start putting in some ad breaks for the people who are listening on different platforms. And now, as I'd mentioned last night, we're growing this new podcast, and it's going to take a little while to work out some of the kinks with it as we get it on different platforms and distribute it. But as of last night's episode, you should be able to get the Command Briefing podcast on a bunch of different services now. I have it on iHeart, Spotify, Google, a bunch of them I'd never even heard of before. Odds are, whatever podcast platform you like to listen to, if you just search for Command Briefing on there, you're going to find me. And I hope that you'll be listening. I hope that we're getting back some of our old listeners from the old Periscope days. If you've wondered where I was, hey, I'm back again.
Baby, if you've ever wondered whatever became of me, I'm living on the air
in northern Georgia. It's time for another command briefing. So, yeah, if you remember us from the old days, we talk about daily events. We break down things. We used to do that in the lead up to the 2020 election, giving executive summary of news of the day with context and analysis. And then after the election, that gave us a bunch to talk about. And we dove into a bunch of that last night. If you haven't had a chance to listen to episode 1, I still encourage you to go back and listen to that. But we're going to add on to that in a big way tonight. So the news of the day, the big news of the day, didn't happen until about 5 o'clock. There were some rumors of it late afternoon. But Jack Smith got his indictment for the ham sandwich out of the D.C. grand jury for Trump related to January 6th. Now, people had a lot of theories on how this would go. I mean, we were looking at possible, sedition, all kinds of different novel legal theories that we expected him to go after. And I'm surprised by some of what he didn't do in that regard, which, I'm going to say, I will make a prediction now. I expect the January 6th stuff to also be subject to one of these superseding indictments. I don't necessarily think that the jerk is done. I think, that's part of the strategy here. Keep things in your back pocket so that when the news cycle warrants, that they can come and dump something else back into the news cycle again. And it was, frankly, it was just too predictable, wasn't it? We have this closed door hearing yesterday. Devin Archer did not go well for the Biden crime syndicate in any way, shape, or form. Now, you had Goldman out there trying to spin before the transcript came out. But there's no question now. Joe Biden lied about what he knew. I mean, if you give it a charitable take, a charitable take says that Hunter Biden was trying to make his business associates at least feel like Joe Biden could do something for them. And I said, that's assuming, a whole lot. And none of that even comports to what Joe Biden has said, which is, I knew nothing about his business, don't even know what he was involved with. I was in no way connected to it. We know that's false. Of course, the realistic take is there actually was bribery involved, and we still have that smoking gun tape of Biden talking about getting the prosecutor fired in Ukraine. So we know that there was a likely trade here, but at the very least he lied. And within 24 hours, boom, you get another indictment handed down. And yes, they will continue to do this. They will keep superseding indictments in their back pocket. They will, it's basically just create mayhem and damage at this point in the cycle. And they can't be completely ignorant to what has gone on here, watching indictments come down and Trump gets a boost in the polls. So now, yes, as I said last night, you have to take legal jeopardy seriously, especially when you're up against the federal government. They have a lot of resources. They can ruin pretty much anybody. And, I don't care if you're a billionaire. The federal government is a multi-trillionaire. They can always outspend you. They can always have more lawyers than you. Legal jeopardy is real. But at the same time, they have to know some of the legal theories that they're relying on here are really bad, are not going to play well in the public. Because look, trials, they happen in the public too, and people will have opinions. And if you try to railroad somebody, people are going to have strong feelings about that. Now they're relying on, there's a certain segment of people who hate Trump that will eat up anything that he gives them, with a spoon. Hey, if he says that Trump committed a crime by putting on his shoes in the wrong order, there are a certain amount of people out there who would go along with that, who would get on Twitter and repeat it. We know. We're not talking about those people and trying to convince them. But there are normal people out there, again, who do have a sense of fairness, who are somewhat perceptive, even if they don't hang on every word of politics happening in America. They know that something stinks. But the chaos, the fight over it is part of the distraction. While everyone's fighting over whether these charges are even valid or not, what are they not talking about? They're not talking about Joe Biden. They're not talking about Hunter. They're not talking about the attempts to interfere in the upcoming election. It gives them a convenient out for so many things. And so that's what he has done. He has delivered an indictment, and we're going to go through some of it. It is just really shaky on so many levels. Basically what he's done, he has made charges out of opinions and thoughts. It is literal thought crime when you look at the indictment. But I tell you what we're going to do. We're going to take, for just a moment, we're going to take a brief timeout. This will be where ads get inserted in episodes. If you're listening live, just bear with us for a moment, and we'll be right back. All right, folks. Thank you for your patience as we try to get a little bit of sponsorship here for what we're doing. But we're back, and let's talk a little bit about the indictment itself. Now, one of the things that we talked about last night, I talked about Fannie Willis in Fulton County in Georgia and what she is trying to do. And I told you that case, if it moves forward, is going to be a total embarrassment. It's basically criminalizing things that are not novel. They're not new. They've been done before. They're basically criminalizing the very idea of questioning the outcome of the election. And I thought that was going to be the biggest embarrassment of all of them. And lo and behold, what Jack Smith has done, he's just taken that Fannie Willis case and put it on the national level. This is a case that is charging Trump with a crime for going through the motions to try to ensure that the election was fair, using legal means that were available to him, using lawyers who are now considered, by the way, co-conspirators in this. Yeah, I mean, you got to know somebody like Jenna Ellis, who is known now to very easily be swayed to try to cover her own rear end. Yeah, now it kind of makes more sense why she's trying to be this different person and be on Team DeSantis. I mean, she is running scared of this. And I think that what people need to do is stand firm. I said last night, do I think that Trump had the best legal representation in all of his election challenges? He certainly didn't, because they were, as I said before, they had this tendency for a kitchen sink approach to go after anything that pointed to fraud, instead of making a very, what I thought was the right strategy, make a very narrow case around the ballots that should not have been counted except for new rules that were improperly put in place, which denied fraud prevention measures such as signature verification and chain of custody documentation. I think that was a simple case to make, and I think if Trump had had more competent legal help, not only would that case have been made better, it certainly would have avoided some of the problems that he has now in terms of legal jeopardy from what Jack Smith has introduced. But if you read through the indictment itself, the indictment here is basically to spin a narrative. It tells a story. There's not a whole lot of law in this. And I'm not a lawyer. I've read many legal documents in my day, anything from, contracts, legal proceedings, related to lawsuits and things like that. Something that just flat out spins a narrative and then just kind of appends what they perceive as the relevant law on the end of it. I mean, even for a DC court, I mean, this is just bad, folks. I mean, this basically goes to Trump says that he was cheated in the election, but he knew that wasn't true. Why did he know that wasn't true? Well, of course, the very people who were in charge of the new procedures, the potential fraud, told him, hey, nothing to see here, Trump. You brought up a challenge. We said, hey, you're wrong. And now that we've told you that you're wrong, you're supposed to accept our word for it. So now if you go out there into the media, anywhere, and talk about being defrauded, being cheated, well, you're doing it making knowing false statements. which, Jack Smith is kind enough to say the defendant had a right, like every American, to speak publicly about the election and to even claim falsely that there had been outcome determinative fraud during the election and that he had won. He was also entitled to formally challenge the results of the election through lawful and appropriate means, such as by seeking recounts or audits of the popular vote in states or filing lawsuits challenging ballots and procedures. Well, that's so magnanimous to say that he had those rights, but then the rest of the indictment goes into why doing those things makes him a criminal. The fact that he knowingly lied in Jack Smith's world, that's what makes it criminal. The fact that he used lawyers to go after other legal theories, that's why it's criminal, because Trump already should have known that those theories were not valid because, hey, these officials told you it was all clean. It was all okay. It was on the up and up. You should have taken their word for it. And so that's the narrative that it goes through here. Now, it basically is a exercise in projection, too. I mean, they're trying to say that it was Trump trying to steal the election by discounting people's votes. And this goes again to the heart of what Fani Willis is trying to do in Fulton County. And it goes back to that whole phone conversation that Trump had with Brad Raffensperger and other Georgia officials in that example of, hey, I'm about 11,000 votes behind. We need to go find those votes. Again, that's not an invitation to fraud. That's saying we have all of these dubious ballots out there. Why aren't we looking at them seriously? And as far as the legal challenges, again, he was pushed aside time after time on standing grounds. And these cases were not heard, so they weren't vetted. And we've talked about who really had standing in these cases, whether it was Georgia, Arizona, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. They also mention Nevada and New Mexico in here as far as these slates of alternate or provisional electors, which they call fake electors. The lawsuit should have been brought by the state legislatures who had their authority usurped. But this indictment where, Trump is talking in public, saying to these state legislatures, hey, do your job. Well, that's become also, too, another count in the indictment. This is part of the fraud. He's asking the legislatures of these states to overturn the election. No, he's identifying who had the proper legal standing in each of those states to assert their authority to have their rules as they enacted them followed to the letter. He's asking them to do their job, and now, hey, no, he's asking state legislatures to overturn the election. I mean, this is nuts stuff, folks. And so what it comes down to, you have a conspiracy to defraud the United States by using dishonesty. Again, Jack Smith says that Trump has a right to say whatever he thinks about the election, even if it's false. But then that's part of the fraud, is that he was dishonest. So, yeah, work on that. And deceit to impair, obstruct, and defeat the lawful federal government function by which the results of the presidential election are collected, counted, certified by the federal government in violation of 18 U.S.C. 371. Well, okay, I feel like a civics class got missed somewhere. The elections are run by the respective states. Trump was going to these respective states. And that's what he was asking Mike Pence to do, which there was authority to do. And we know that there was authority for Mike Pence to do because after they got Trump out, they quickly amended the law around how that electoral college process works to take away the authority that Mike Pence refused to use, which was to say there are enough open questions about the validity here that we're going to return this back to the respective states. Now, I said 2.5 years ago, because again, I understand what is happening here, that this is not simply a Democrat fraud against Republicans. This is an establishment, bureaucratic, deep state, if you will, fraud against outsiders who might deign to try to run for federal office, much less the presidency itself, and actually represent the people who elected that person, rather than simply going along with the uniparty interest and the semblance of a constitutional republic, but in reality where bureaucrats make the decisions, and we just have this patina of democratic republic legitimacy around it. Pretty nuts stuff if you look at it. And let's see what else. We have a conspiracy to corruptly obstruct and impede the January 6th congressional proceeding, at which the collected results of the presidential election are counted and certified. Again, Mike Pence had the authority, and we know he had the authority because they had to change the rules. He had the authority to send it back to those respective states. Now, they were probably going to send back the original slates of electors in all of those cases. I know Georgia certainly would have. If Mike Pence had done what he said he was going to do just days before January 6th and follow through, it wouldn't have changed the outcome. And as sad as that is, I mean, Trump was right to pursue every valid theory. That is what needed to be done. But at the end of the day, the Republicans were in on things with the Democrats. It was the establishment. They still would have sent back the original slate of electors and said, hey, no, you're wrong. Everything's A-okay. Trump, I believe, hoped that the public's interest in this, that it would bring more scrutiny on things. And by this point, I think that a lot of Trump supporters themselves were very much dejected, demoralized. Even though I don't blame him for trying, and I do blame Mike Pence for saying he would do something and not doing it, I don't think that it would have changed anything because these states were manifestly corrupt. But how do you criminalize Trump for asking them to simply do their jobs under the Constitution? That's all that he asked in that is, hey, go back, look for signature verification. You know, it's not an audit. It's not a recount. If you just simply take the same bad batches of ballots and recount those, real auditing is looking at whether those ballots should have even been counted in the first place. So, yeah, that's not good, and it's just the beginning of the narrative spin here. But I tell you what, let's go ahead and we'll take another quick break for ad insertion, and we'll be back in just a moment here. Welcome back. Thank you for your patience through the break. And if you're listening to the recording, take advantage of the advertisers. We're trying to keep this program going by making it a for-profit venture as a podcast. So thank you for that. Let's dig into a little bit more of this indictment, because I know everyone's not going to take time to read 45 pages of this crap. And we're not going to go through all 45 pages here. Have more respect and love for my audience than to bore you with that. Because, again, it's weaving a story, and you look at it. I mean, it's like chapters in a novel. The Conspiracy. From on or about November 14th through on or about January 20th, in the District of Columbia and elsewhere, the defendant, Donald J. Trump, did knowingly combine, conspire, confederate, and agree with co-conspirators, known and unknown to the grand jury, to defraud the United States by using dishonesty, fraud, and deceit to impair, obstruct, and defeat the lawful federal government function by which the results of the presidential election, blah, blah, blah. You've heard that before. So who were the co-conspirators in this? Because that's how you really ramp this up, right? And again, that's how they make it really salivating, kind of, juicy stuff for the media, is having a conspiracy. Who are the co-conspirators? Co-conspirator 1, an attorney who is willing to spread knowingly false claims and pursue strategies that the defendant's 2020 re-election campaign attorneys would not. Wait a minute. He's willing to spread knowingly false claims. I mean, have you met a lawyer? Has anybody here met a lawyer before? I mean, we're not talking about perjury in front of a court here. We're talking about, the ability, again, to freely say what you want to say as a matter of First Amendment rights, as a free speech. That's first of all. knowingly false or not, you have the right to say it. He acknowledged such initially in the indictment, only to, countermand himself. But who's to say it was knowingly false? This is thought crime, people. This is 1984. We are prosecuting thought crime. We know that you know, and that's a crime. For all they know, this person sincerely held this belief, whether it was true or not. But also, how scary is that, folks? If you take a narrative that is not approved by the state, now you are a criminal because you are spreading knowingly false information. And folks, where have you heard that before? Where have you heard that recently? Yeah, this has been the last three and a half years of your life now, since 2020. I mean, you know what? I'm actually going to go back further than that. I'm going to go back 4 years, because I was about to start this whole thing with COVID and the spreading of disinformation and getting people displatformed and deplatformed because they disagreed with the experts. It really is much more sinister than that. Look at the first impeachment. The first impeachment of Trump for the perfect phone call with Zelensky, with Ukraine. Why? What was the problem with what Trump did? If you really boil down that entire impeachment, he went against the so-called experts. Well, the experts, the people in the bureaucracy, in the Department of State, the Department of Defense, these different people, told Trump. And Trump decided, hey, well, okay, thank you for the input, but I'm actually the president, and this is going to be our strategy, and this is going to be our policy, which is why we have elected officials and why we have a president. And really, the crime was he didn't listen to people like Vindman. He didn't listen to people like Victoria Nuland. And that was the beef. Trump heard what we had to say, and then he did something different. We told him not to do it. That was the testimony, and he did it anyway. And then you move forward into where, now the rules apply to all of us that you can't go against the state during COVID. How dare you question masks? How dare you question, the science, what they tell us is the science about COVID, almost all of which was wrong. How dare you question our efforts at mitigation, whether it's the social distancing or the shutdowns, the lockdowns, the masks, all of which were scientifically dubious. But again, you could get deplatformed just for going against it. And that's the first step to making it a crime. I mean, if the government, and we know this, the government was in cahoots with social media, asking them to ban people for saying these things that were outside of state guidance, well, that's just, we're talking information. That's scary, folks. That is scary stuff that we're criminalizing. Let's look at co-conspirator number 2 in all of this. I mean, these really just get better and better. An attorney who devised and attempted to implement a strategy to leverage the vice president's ceremonial role overseeing the certification proceeding to obstruct the certification of the presidential election. Ceremonial. Look, this is opinion language. And again, they know that other power was in place there, which is why, again, they had to change the law after they got Trump out of the way. They know that the vice president could have done more. So now they've made sure that in the future he can or won't. But think about it, too, from a constitutional perspective, folks. I mean, honestly, the founding fathers of this country were pretty no-frills in their approach to most everything. You know, the Declaration of Independence itself was heavily edited. Why? Because they wanted it short and sweet. Yeah, a lot of the beautiful, you think it's great now. Yeah, it was a work of art that got heavily edited. Like, hey, we can't have this long monstrosity. People might misunderstand things with clarity. I mean, from an editor's perspective, that's really beautiful. I mean, this is the right thinking. The Constitution very simply lays things out. Very straightforward. The Constitution simply does not set up ceremony. It does not. The Constitution does not set up ceremony. I repeat that for effect because that's what they're having you believe, is that Mike Pence was just there as a rubber stamp. And that any attempt to even talk about him doing anything more than that was a grand conspiracy against the United States of America. But you have to rely on what they're telling you, which is, hey, this was strictly a ceremonial role, and anyone would have known that. And that's just simply not how that works. Let's see. Co-conspirator number 3, if these keep getting better, an attorney whose unfounded claims of election fraud the defendant privately acknowledged to others sounded crazy. Okay. So co-conspirator 3 is Sidney Powell. I don't think that we need much more to go on. I think the clues are there. Sidney Powell. Nonetheless, the defendant embraced and publicly amplified co-conspirator 3's disinformation. Now, I will take specific issue with this. I'm not a Sidney Powell fan. I wasn't a fan of the whole release the Kraken rhetoric that we got from her. Lynn Wood, Sidney Powell, I think that whole, again, I wanted a nice, clean case made, and I thought that they were mucking it up. And I thought that they did sound crazy. Now, just because I think that she sounded crazy in the way that she pursued it does not mean that I think that electronic voting is not ripe for fraud. It doesn't mean that I don't think that voting machines from Dominion or anybody else are a good way to conduct elections. It doesn't mean that I wouldn't like to have been able to go back and looked at and audited some of those machines that were in fact wiped clean before anybody could do a forensic audit. So why, just because I think that she sounded crazy in the way that she pursued it, I mean, that happens all the time. I mean, there's a ton of people. Twitter is a great example. Think of your own experience. There's probably people that you agree with in broad strokes, but sometimes the way they explain it, you think, okay, you're kind of out there where the buses don't run now. I can't quite go along with all of your theory, but in broad principle, we agree. So again, they're criminalizing Trump on one hand for saying, oh, she sounds crazy, but still using her and pursuing legal theories around, in this case, we know it's the machines. We know exactly who co-conspirator 3 is. Co-conspirator 4, a Justice Department official who worked on civil matters and who, with the defendant, attempted to use the Justice Department to open sham election crime investigations and influence state legislatures with knowingly false claims of election fraud. Well, okay, that wasn't Bill Barr because, he dropped the ball. Which was always interesting too, right? Like leading up to the 2020 election, he was very clear about the dangers of mail-in ballots. And I don't like the guy, but he's smart. I think he explained pretty well what those dangers were. I think he made a compelling case. And now that it's all said and done, he wouldn't pursue any of this on Trump's behalf. And now he's a complete anti-Trump guy and probably goes along with Jack Smith on all of this. So I'm not well-versed enough in the personnel on this to know exactly who they're referring to as co-conspirator for. But again, this person worked on civil matters. Okay, that's what we have here, a civil matter, who with the defendant attempted to use the Justice Department to open sham election crime investigation. Again, opinion. You're inserting opinion directly into the document. Why is it a sham investigation? It's a sham because we go back on this idea that if Trump and his legal team were told by the experts that he was wrong, he should have believed that it was wrong and said, okay, I'm done, you win. Because that's what you do when the experts tell you something. You don't push back. You don't question them. The experts told you, and that's that. I mean, folks, this is dangerous stuff, not just for Trump, but think about the last 3.5, 4 years of our lives and what this indictment does. It criminalizes thought, and it criminalizes thought specifically around the idea that if you question the official narrative of the state, you are a criminal spreading disinformation. And that if you have any idea that you might use the court system, if that involves you repeating this misinformation or your lawyer repeating that misinformation, now you've not only not cleared yourself of the crime, you've compounded the crime. Very scary stuff. Co-conspirator 5, an attorney who assisted in devising and attempting to implement a plan to submit fraudulent slates of presidential electors to obstruct the certification proceeding. And I'm not quite sure which lawyer that was, but I do know enough to know there's enough information there too to know exactly who they're talking about. If we go back and do a little bit of digging and figure out who was pursuing what 2.5 years ago. Was that one? I mean, was that Jenna Ellis? Was that Giuliani? I don't know for sure. It's one of them. We could figure out which one. I'm sure by the time morning rolls around, somebody will have. Co-conspirator 6, a political consultant who helped implement a plan. Oh, okay. So it's 2 of the same thing. 5 and 6 are the same. So more than one attorney was in on that plan that they call fraudulent electors. Again, this isn't new. This is, it was done as recently, I know, as 1960. So, yeah, this isn't new. Also, too, questioning elections isn't new. Now, for anything else that I think that Hillary Clinton deserves to go to prison for, saying that the election was stolen from her is not one of them. Nor do I think that Stacey Abrams should go to prison. Nor do I think Al Gore should go to prison. Nor do I think that the many other instances throughout this country, and there have been multiple instances, you have to go back in time, but we have had contested elections before. This isn't new. But they're trying to make you think that it's new and that it's a crime. Folks, we're going to go ahead and insert one more ad break in here, and we're going to come back and we're going to wrap this up. But if you're not mad, it's time to start getting mad, folks. Time to start getting mad. All right, folks, let's take it on into the last segment here and wrap her up for the evening. I mean, again, there's a bunch here. 45 pages, ton of stuff. And you can go on Twitter, you can go online. I mean, it's actually a pretty easy read because it so much of it does just read like a novel instead of a legal document. So yeah, don't shy away from it because you think that it's some kind of heavy legal document. If you want to go and read more of this, but coming into the last segment here, I just want to talk a little bit about what this means for 2024 because that's what this is really about. It's all political, and look. I talk about this a lot. I know it's a little bit of beating a dead horse, perhaps, but there's a bunch of pointy heads on Twitter and elsewhere who are going to get into the nuance of legal theory on this, and they're going to be quite right on a lot of it. How this is complete garbage, and that Trump has so many avenues to show, his attorneys have so many avenues to show what complete and utter garbage this is. And they'll be right on the merits, but this is D.C., this is an Obama judge, this is a totally frivolous, yet at the same time serious prosecution of a former president. Never happened. No precedent for this. They're not going to be following the laws to the letter, folks. I hate to tell you. We know this. Again, they could come up with a legal theory as ridiculous as Trump puts his shoes on in the wrong order and half the country, hell, at least a third of the country is going to say, yeah, sounds good to me. I hate the bastard. And that's all they need. And in D.C., 95% of the people are like that. They're liberals. They don't like outsiders. They're entitled. They run things, not us. And so where does that leave us? We can't depend on the courts. We can't even depend on the Supreme Court to do the right thing here. And everything ties together in the end. If you step back and look at the big picture, and that's what we do, we're looking for big picture context. Do you think all of these intimidation campaigns against the Supreme Court of the United States are just about abortion? Do you really think that? I mean, yeah, I know it's partly that. But these people in D.C., since Trump was in there and got 3 new justices on the Supreme Court, they have been very scared of what that means. It certainly has slowed them down. But at the same time, when you pick from Federalist Society judges, you don't always get the best. But we have what we have, and they're at least not complete Sotomayor or Kagan-type liberals. And so the Congress has sought to intimidate the court. So we can't depend on even the Supreme Court to step in here, folks, and make things right. So basically, you have a couple of options. I mean, I would like to continue to live in some kind of semblance of social order. I mean, it's easier for me. It's easier for you. I mean, as much as people talk about ideas like national divorce, it's not going to happen. If liberals could live and let live, then federalism would work. California could do, things that Georgia or Oklahoma doesn't do, but they would be okay to leave it at that. You're never going to get a peaceful national divorce. Now, when things break down, history tells us that that's ugly. So I would like some kind of semblance of social order to remain. And folks, there's one way you get it and one way only, and that is to, in spite of everything that they have done to defraud him, cheat him, charge him, send him to prison for simply getting elected president when they didn't want him to, the only answer to that is to elect Trump. I'm sorry, if you at this stage don't see it, you're part of the problem too. Because DeSantis and his campaign, he's going to get out there and release his statements about the weaponization of the DOJ is improper, and when I'm president, we'll make sure to not weaponize the system of justice. That's wrong. He's going to say that, while his surrogates are out there and have been campaigning on exactly these same talking points that are in the Jack Smith indictment. And I've seen it. I've been on there. The Max Nordaus, the official mouthpieces also of the campaign, the influencer campaign, the Cardillos, the other people, are out there saying, yeah, Trump knew he lost. He lost. He knew he lost. SOB. Do you really think that DeSantis is going to do anything to fix the problem, which is the only way he would have a chance of getting elected in the first place? I would say not, but I would take it one step further. If they even thought for even half of a minute that he was serious, well, they wouldn't be any more likely to let him win than Trump. They would come after him too, and he would not have nearly the experience or resources to fight it that Trump does. He wouldn't have the loyal following to stand with him that Trump does. So you can either, look at DeSantis as he's going to be part of the problem if he gets elected, in which case nothing changes, or he is going to be completely sandbagged by the problem if he were to try to do something about it, and totally unprepared for what lays in front of him because he hasn't taken this whole thing really that seriously as a campaign issue. So your one choice for social order is to shove Trump right down their throats in such numbers that they can't cheat it. And people will say, oh, they cheated in 2020. It doesn't even matter anymore. I mean, I've heard so much whining and crying about it. I mean, it makes me sick. And it's not to say that I don't think that they're going to do those things. What I do mean to say is they tried to cheat in 2016 also. And we still won. And we can do that again if we'll put our minds to it, and we'll use this righteous anger to stand up, not just for Trump, but as the representation of we get to vote in this country for who we want to, and the entrenched bureaucrats don't get to choose candidates for us, and they don't get to choose what statements a person is allowed to make about elections, about the law, about process, about procedure. They don't get to criminalize that. They don't get to criminalize you as a co-conspirator for going against the narrative that has been put out officially by the state. Trump is the one hope that you have to maintain semblance of social order and have a government that is represented by you and which has your consent to govern. Plan B is to go pick up a rifle. And God, I hope that we're not at that point yet. Because that's ugly, people. I mean, it's easy to talk about it on Twitter, but that is seriously nasty, ugly stuff. People die in those conflicts. Even if this breaks out into street violence. I mean, look, people died in the George Floyd riots. Ashley Babbitt died in the Capitol. I don't want to see a breakdown of order. That's why I want to shove Trump down their throat. But if you're not willing to do that, and if you still want to maintain your freedom, plan B is war. Or plan C is you can be a serf, you can be a servant of the state. And I want absolutely no part of that, people. I won't tolerate it, and you shouldn't either. But that's the command briefing for Tuesday, August 1st. Thank you for listening. This is Jared A. Chambers, and we'll be back again, folks. Thank you for listening.